Trades and rookie drafts are a ton of fun, but picking players up for free off the waiver wire is a great way to get an edge on your league mates. And there is no better feeling than picking up a guy for free that you can plug into your week in and week out lineup. And today, Jeff Bell and we are going to discuss players to target on the waiver wire right now that could be available in your dynasty league. Jeff, go ahead and start us off. Who's a guy right now that dynasty managers have just given up hope on that you are trying to pick up where you can?
Boy, Dave, I was going to name a player, but he's certainly owned rostered on every team. But
Then
let's
cheap, a
start the show off.
throw in, like, hey, somebody wants to move up in round 3, throw this player in. You know what we're talking about. The guys that are way, way down. Like I'm talking outside of the top 150 players. We're on the same page here. Might not be available in waivers, but still out there.
Keep trade cut running back 57 is Jerome Ford right now. And we were talking pre-show, but can you name another running back on the Cleveland Browns right now beyond Jerome Ford? I mean,
Pierre Strong, I believe, is still
Pierre
there.
Strong and John Kelly Jr. are the other two
Who?
running backs on the Cleveland Browns right now with Jerome Ford there. Certainly the Browns will likely select a player in the draft. I mean, this is a very, very deep class. They'll add a back to that backfield. But when you're talking about keep trade cut running back 57, you can get Jerome Ford without any competition. Maybe Nick Chubb comes back. Maybe Nick Chubb never plays football again. We don't really know there, but I think that's the type of player that he's got a great shot at 1,000 yards. We don't really know who's going to be the Browns quarterback either. There's a lot of unknown around the Browns right now, but I think that you're talking about a throw and you're talking about an under the radar piece. I think Jerome Ford kind of qualifies for that right now.
All right, we're going to get off the rails, Jeff, less than 2 minutes into the show because you said something that I want to peel back a little bit. You talked about the uncertainty in Cleveland, and I feel like uncertainty, that's always where you're able to find these deals, and I'm guilty of it as well. I mean, we're talking about Travis Hunter right now, right? Like in your rookie drafts, typically falling into the middle of round 2. We know Travis Hunter is getting drafted inside the top 5. We don't know if he's going to be a wide receiver or a cornerback. Is there any situation in the world where Travis Hunter is drafted inside the top 5 and doesn't increase his value after the draft? It's just the uncertainty right now. We don't know where he's going to play, but the reality is if he gets drafted top 5 and they come out and say he's going to be going 50-50 wide receiver and quarterback, people are still going to say, well, that's enough for me. At least I have my answer now. And they're going to move him up their draft boards. And it's just this uncertainty. People get so nervous about what they don't know. And when you see this Browns roster right now, it is in disarray. They don't know what the team's going to look like next year. But Pierre Strong, we know he is a fast player. And we know that those fast players can rip off the big plays. And we know that he's proven that he can be productive at the NFL level. So that's the perfect type of player to go out there and try to get right now.
Yeah, and I think Travis Hunter, we'll go there real quick because this is not a show about Travis Hunter. This is a show about veterans under the radar. But real quick, I think what's happening with him is when he first broke out, when his freshman year, he came in recruited as a cornerback. And he was a full-time cornerback that moonlit a little bit at wide receiver. We kind of have seen a little bit of that in the past. We've seen Deion Sanders take, I mean, if you're old like me, you've seen Deion Sanders take occasional snaps on offense. Devin Hester is a player that Devin Hester started as a cornerback, and then he transferred to being a wide receiver. And you've seen some other areas. Chris Gamble is a player that was a cornerback in the NFL level. He was a full-time wide receiver in college. And so there's been these players occasionally, and Travis Hunter didn't pop as wide receiver really until his junior year when he won the Heisman Trophy this past year. But when you look at the value in NFL, wide receiver is still valued much higher than a cornerback, and you build him into your offense as a wide receiver. You have him play in nickel packages or however much he can handle. It's just that we've never seen it before. And you talk about uncertainty, you're exactly right. But yes, and roundabout point, uncertainty is what do you want to target when it comes to these veteran under the radar players?
Well, now that we've spent half of our show talking about Travis Hunter, let's go ahead and talk about some more veterans to target in your dynasty leagues. Jeff, whose idea was it to give two guys that are second chairs? I don't know if either of us are really cut to be a host. We're both kind of the second chair guys on our shows, and they gave us a show, and this is what happens. So thanks, Joe, or sorry, Joe, whatever we say here.
Don't sell yourself short, Dave. I think we're both 1.5 chairs. So
all right. So we make a show if you put us together. Well, here we go. The guy I want to talk about, hardly a veteran. I mean, he's just going into year 2 here, but Jordan Whittington, I think, is a guy who's still available in a handful of leagues out there, but a guy that you can absolutely get is, like we said, kind of a throw-in. If somebody wants to move up in round 3 or do a pick swap, you could probably try to look at a guy like Jordan Whittington as the real target while moving some other pieces around and using him as a throw-in. And he's just a player that didn't really do all that much, but the efficiency that he had last year was unbelievable. 2.46 yards per route run. Small sample, but that's more yards per route run than Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas Jr. Among 20 wide receivers, or I'm sorry, among all the wide receivers with 20 plus targets last year, only 7 had more yards per route run than Jordan Whittington. And we're talking about Mike Evans, Lad McConkey, A.J. Brown, Nico Collins, Rashee Rice, and Puka Nacua, some very, very good wide receivers. And I think right now you can get him for even cheaper because of the Davante Adams acquisition in Los Angeles. But Davante Adams turns 33 this year. There's no guarantee that he can be that guy for more than just this year. And Jordan Whittington, he just fits the mold of wide receivers that we've had seen find success under Sean McVay. Whether it's Robert Woods or Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp, he likes the guys that get involved in the blocking game, the guys who aren't afraid to go across the middle of the field, the guys who can line up in line or in the slot or out wide, kind of do it all. And that's what Jordan Whittington does. So still a young player who really didn't do much his rookie season, but a guy that I am still targeting pretty aggressively in dynasty leagues, just hoping that he can be that guy 2 or 3 years down the road.
Dave, who do you think holds, so Texas high school football, kind of a big deal, Texas high school football. Guess who holds the record for most rushing yards in a Texas football state championship game?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. Is it Jordan Whittington, perhaps?
It is. It used to be Eric Dickerson, and it is Jordan Whittington. Ran for 334 yards. He also played defense too, and so that's Jordan Whittington. He came in as a athlete. The definition of athlete. We talk about Travis Hunter, but he was a blue chip athlete. He kind of ended up as a glue guy in that Texas receiver room. We had another episode this week. We talked a little bit briefly about that Texas receiver room with Xavier Worthy and with Adonai Mitchell. Whittington was a bit of a glue guy that can block, that you can get the ball in his hands. He can get the ball creative different ways. And I think that that's what he can really add into this Rams offense. That you look at the Rams, and I think an underrated piece that has left is Demarcus Robinson is no longer there as well. And there was a great connection between Demarcus Robinson and Matthew Stafford. Now it's basically Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington at this time. We don't have the draft yet. They could easily draft and add another player into that rotation. But that's another thing that we talk about, ambiguity and uncertainty. Some of these players, people will see this episode and they will say, well, they're going to draft somebody. I don't want to go there and get them because they're going to draft somebody.
Discount.
And then if they don't draft anybody, they didn't draft anybody. And all of a sudden, here you're sitting with a player in a prime position.
Yeah. So Jordan Whittington, just a player I like, really liked what I saw from his rookie season. And I say this on the fantasy football show all the time, but I don't know if I've said it here yet on the Dynasty show, but I like wide receivers that can block. And I know that sounds really weird, but blocking turns into snaps, and snaps turns into routes turns into targets, and targets turn into fantasy points. So a guy like Jordan Whittington, who was a day 3 pick, was able to find the field pretty consistently in his rookie season. And I expect him to continue building off of that. Jeff, who's another guy you would like to talk about, a guy that we're deeming a veteran that you can get for cheap and try to stash in your dynasty leagues?
Keep trade cut wide receiver 86. And this is a player that he was stashed until some recent news, but Andrei Iosivas from Cincinnati. And I think people would stash him with the thoughts of maybe T. Higgins leaves, and we knew Ja'Marr Chase wasn't going to go anywhere, but if T. Higgins leaves, then maybe he ascends to the wide receiver 2. I think that when you look at the way that the Bengals are structured, especially the lack of defense that the Bengals have, this is an offense that is going to have to throw the ball and score points to win games. They have expectations of winning games. They have built their team. They have invested heavily on the passing offense. And Andrei Iosivas is the type of player that I've heard. I believe it was the Daniel Jeremiah's and Bucky Brooks podcast, Move the Sticks, talked about how the Colts were built. When you flash back to when they had Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, and Peyton Manning as that centerpieces there, the Bengals being built very similarly. If you remember back, there was, I don't think, was it Brandon Stokely was the wide receiver 3 then, but I do remember that I think there was a 1,000-yard wide receiver 3 on one of those Colts offenses that was under the radar.
Yeah, I think it was Stokely sounds right. I know he was with Denver for a big chunk of his career, but I think he did have a few years there as well behind Wayne and Marvin Harrison. And Josevich, I mean, you just look, the size speed combo here is awesome to see. I mean, we're looking at a guy 6'3", 4.43 40-yard dash, puts him inside the 90th percentile for size adjusted speed. You know, he just checked all of the athletic boxes that we wanted to see and hasn't really put it together yet, but really easy to see how he can be the wide receiver 3 in this offense and team that's going to play out of 11 personnel often and let Joe Burrow throw the ball. There's going to be enough for Josevich. Was Brandon Stokely the right guy, Jeff?
It was. Yeah,
All
and
right.
and so Brandon Stokely in 2024, he had 1,000 yards and 1,077 yards and 10 touchdowns on an offense that Reggie Wayne had 1,210 yards with 12 touchdowns, and Marvin Harrison Jr. had 1,113 yards with 15 touchdowns. So 3 different receivers that all cracked 1,000 yards and all hit double-digit touchdowns. And in 2025, we could have just looked that up pre-show and been prepared, but that's why you subscribe and listen to Football Guys, because we can pull things like Brandon
Yeah.
Stokely out of the recesses of our mind.
Yes, you can see the wheels spinning throughout the show. I'm going to stick with the wide receiver theme here. We, just talked about Jordan Whittington. You talked about Andrei Josevich. I want to talk about Darius Slayton, a guy who is just a good wide receiver. And sometimes it's as simple as that, but I also see that the opportunity is going to be here. And Jeff, you talked about it. You know, a lot of the YouTube comments are going to say, well, what if they draft this guy? And I know the biggest objection to wanting to acquire Darius Slayton is, well, what if they draft Travis Hunter and they make him a full-time wide receiver? Well, what if they don't? What if they go a different route in the draft? What if they draft Shedeur Sanders? What if they draft Abdul Carter? What if they draft Travis Hunter and decide that he is more important as a cornerback than he is as a wide receiver? Either way, Darius Slayton is a guy who has been pretty good throughout his career with the Giants so far, and they rewarded him with a 3-year, $36 million contract. $22 million of that contract is guaranteed, so we know he's going to be in New York for at least the next 2 years. And if they don't go out and they draft Travis Hunter, there's no other wide receiver that's really worthy of that top 3 picks. So as it stands right now, Darius Slayton is the wide receiver 2 there. And I know Wan'Dale Robinson might have him beat in the targets department, but Darius Slayton is a guy who can get behind defenses, score big plays, and that's what we want in fantasy. So really cheap veteran out there that you can go out and get. Nobody wants anything to do with the Giants. Nobody wants anything to do with the Giants passing game outside of Malik Neighbors. But because of that, you can go out and probably get Darius Slayton for a 4th round pick.
Yes.
On
I
to
don't
the
have much
next
to say
one.
about
That's enough Darius Slayton
so
talk for tonight.
yeah, pretty much where my mind is on that one.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Darius Slayton too much, but cheap. You can get him for a 4th round pick, and he could, back his way into 100 plus targets this year. Jeff, who do you want to talk about next? You want to keep it going with the wide receivers, or you want to switch positions up here a little bit?
Yeah, you talked about your gross random wide receiver that probably won't matter. I'm gonna talk about my gross random wide receiver that probably won't matter. Tre Tucker is keep trade cut wide receiver 92. And you look at the Raiders, they added Geno Smith. They have a new quarterback. They have a quarterback that can actually get the ball to some players. And Tre Tucker flashed in moments last year. He's pretty I'm gonna check real quick. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty cemented in as the wide receiver 2 right now in that Raiders offense. I mean, the target number 3 with Jacoby Myers and with Brock Bowers, but adding Geno Smith, that should be a higher ceiling passing offense. And this is a player that he's going to be on the field most every snap, I would imagine, the way the Raiders are structured right now. You're looking at Kyle Phillips, Raymel Keaton, Christian Wilkinson as the other receivers on that depth chart. They certainly need to add talent on that depth chart. But again, Tucker flashed. He is the type of player that way under the radar, better in best ball guy if you want to go there, but definitely has that capability to drop 100 yards in most any game and score most often when he touches the ball.
Yeah, and I mean, we're getting deep down here talking about Tre Tucker and Darius Slayton. When we said, deep veterans to stash, we didn't undersell it. We're going deep here, but I hopped over to keep trade cut while you were saying that, and I think the big thing that jumps out to me, Jeff, this is crazy, just how far these guys have fallen. DeAndre Hopkins and Adam Thielen ranked behind Tre Tucker and Darius Slayton in crowdsourced consensus rankings. So, boy, does that change quick. All right, Jeff, do we want to talk the next guy? I've got two routes I can go here. Do you want to hear about my tight end or do you want to hear about my quarterback?
I want to hear about your tight end, Dave. I always want to hear about your tight end.
Brenton Strange is a guy that I am trying to get everywhere I can in dynasty leagues right now, largely in part because of some of the things that you have said to me, Jeff. So sorry if I'm stealing your guy here, but Jacksonville's offense, as long as Trevor Lawrence has been there, has focused around a tight end. You know, they want that reliable across the middle of the field, near the end zone type of receiver. And that's what Evan Ingram has been for the last few years. But it seems like they like Brenton Strange, a round 2 pick who is now the heir apparent for Evan Ingram, who was shipped out of Jacksonville. And we saw last year what a tight end can do in Liam Cohen's offense when Cade Otton had to step up as that number 2 pass catcher after Chris Godwin went down. And before they fully trusted Jalen McMillan in his role, and Cade Otton was giving us consistent top 5 production week in and week out. And now when you look at this Jaguars depth chart, of course they're in a position where they could potentially draft a round 1, round 2, or round 3 wide receiver. They'd all make sense. And we talked about that last week, talking about some of the biggest draft needs around the NFL. But if they don't, Brenton Strange is the guy that would likely be number 2 in targets. If not him, maybe Gabe Davis. But either way, we're trying to look at the uncertainty here. And I think that people assume that it's just inked in pen already that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to go out and draft a wide receiver 2 behind Brian Thomas. But if they don't, Brenton Strange is going to skyrocket in value. And he's one of those guys right now that you can get for super cheap. Again, probably throw a late 3rd, early 4th round pick out there and you can get Brenton Strange in return. And he's a guy who, if they choose not to draft a wide receiver, could easily be number 2 on his team in targets this year.
So I laugh every time I see, and something you see is that edges are dead in fantasy football. Everybody knows everything. Edges are dead, especially in dynasty football. If you study contracts and you look at drafts, there is massive edges that can be realized in dynasty football. And Evan Ingram was a player that I don't think, especially going into last year, nobody would have imagined that the Jaguars would have cut Evan Ingram. But if you looked at his contract, it was structured to have a massive balloon on the end of his contract when they signed him in free agency, to the point where one of two things were going to need to happen. They were either going to need to give him an extension and spread that money out, or cut him like they did. And they took Brenton Strange in the 2nd round of the draft 2 years ago. And so you take a guy in the 2nd round of the draft, you've signed a guy the year before in free agency that has a massive balloon on his contract at the end that is going to require attention in the next year. And what happens? He gets released, and Brenton Strange is rightfully everybody's hot waiver pickup. And I think he's a great call out in this show, but I think more.
But the window might have already closed.
The window might have already closed. One, the window should have been probably November when Jeff Bell said it first. But also, I think when you look at it's just a lesson, and it's something that you can learn and get a leg up on your league mates and be a better player. Look for those situations and look for, again, a way to figure out undervalued players. Look at players that were drafted high in situations that can ascend into larger roles.
And is that a good segue for the next guy you want to talk about, Jeff?
I believe it is a good segue for the next guy that I want to talk about, because another lesson that you can learn is the next guy is Audric Estime, running back from the Denver Broncos. And I know that we've kind of danced around this Denver backfield before, and there's been replies, and everybody says, well, they're adding somebody. What are you talking about? And then maybe they probably will add a rookie. And you flash back to some of those backfields that Sean Payton had with the Saints when they had Pierre Thomas along with Reggie Bush and Mark Ingram and some of those other pieces, Darren Sproles in that mix. But right now, when you look at the Broncos, it's Audric Estime, it's Jaleel McLaughlin, and then it's kind of just maybe some under the radar guys. And I think that it's very, very easy, especially what you saw last year from Estime. You talk about like the Jamal Williams type role of a guy that can end up with 10 to 12 to 15 touchdowns. I think Estime is really under the radar right now. He's running back 59 on keep, trade, cut. And there's so many different lessons that can be learned off of Estime. When you look at, again, looking at contracts, Javonte Williams was going to be a free agent. There was a lot of talk during the season that Denver was disappointed with what they were getting from Javonte Williams. It was probably very, very unlikely that Javonte Williams was going to be a Denver Bronco in 2025. They drafted a player that they didn't stop talking about loving. It's just that you didn't get any of those big fantasy pop moments or any of that production that pushes him down all the way to running back 59. But I think that you've got a great area to talk about on some of these second year running backs, and Estime, I think, fits that mold very, very strongly.
Yeah, and I'll take that a step further. I really like the estimate call out, but every year two running back that didn't do much as a rookie is a guy that I'm trying to target. It seems like we see this every single year. We get so excited about these rookies and then they don't immediately perform. People drop them, people trade them for, worthless rookie picks, and then they break out in year two. I mean, Kyron Williams is a perfect example of a guy a couple of years ago, but in that same draft class, we also had Zamir White and Ty Chandler, who may not have broken out in the way that we wanted to, but they broke out at the right time and were guys that you could have gotten for free off of your dynasty waiver wires and were league winners 2 years ago. So, I feel like it's just due diligence right now if you're in a dynasty league to check your waiver wire. Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Blake Corum, those guys probably aren't available, but Jalen Wright, Will Shipley, Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, those guys might be available and they have every opportunity to break out here in 2025. So, always year two running backs just continue to be a good investment you can make.
Yeah, and think about this, just think about this practically in your own life. If you start a new job, in that first year on a new job, and those first 6 months or so on that new job, your head is spinning. You're trying to figure out what you're actually supposed to be doing. You're trying to figure out the dynamics of where you work. You're trying to figure out your new daily routine. Every single part of it is new, and you're trying to figure it out. And then think about 6 months to a year into that job. You've got your routine settled. You know exactly what you need to do. Everything has slowed down. And that's the reality with a lot of these guys. They come out of situations where they were stars in high school. Then in college, they were stars too. And things came very, very easy for a lot of these players throughout high school and college. And then all of a sudden, everybody is bigger, faster, stronger than anything you've seen in your entire life. And
Mhm.
sometimes that takes a minute to figure it out and to figure out how to hit those holes, how to do what you need to do. And sometimes you just need to realize that you've known all along. There's just a lot goes into it. And so second year breakouts, I think, are big. And two, it comes on the team side as well, that trust that they've seen.
Yep.
Okay, we know that this is a guy we can rely on. We know how to utilize this guy. Now we can position him for success. We can position ourselves for success. And that is what a good, strong, cohesive organization will do.
And I think we saw that arc that you kind of talk about from year one, getting kind of shocked at the speed and strength of the NFL, and then coming back in year two and looking a little bit better. I think we saw that whole kind of arc on a speed run for Trey Benson, a guy who, if you watch early in the season, looked horrendous. I mean, he was not playing good football. And if you watch Trey Benson, he's a big guy, 6 foot, nearly 220 pounds, and he's got that size adjusted speed that we love to see. But early in the season, he was not hitting defenders head on. He was trying to bounce every single run out wide, and the efficiency metrics were some of the worst in the NFL. And then they reeled back his workload a ton. And I don't know if he just spent time watching James Conner up close or what it was, but he came out then all of a sudden. It was week 9 that they gave him another opportunity and they started giving him some touches again, and he looked good. And then he got more touches again in week 10, and he looked even better. And he started using his size and using his strength that we didn't see him using in the first half of the year. So Trey Benson, a guy probably not available in your dynasty league, but a guy that we saw kind of adjusting to the new level of play in real time. And we're going to see a lot more guys do that now over this offseason going into 2025.
Yeah, and we're 23 minutes into the show, which means it's time for Jeff's random Ohio State Easter egg. But the guy that really stands out in my mind, and this is in college football, but Beanie Wells, you flash back, he came in as a high level recruit, very, very excited about him. And when you watched him play as a true freshman, he looked like he thought the running back's job was to find his first teammate that he could and run directly into the back of him. And then after a year, he figured it out and became I don't think he went first round. I think he went second round, but with the Cardinals, his career did not end up being very
First round
long.
pick. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a first round pick with the Cardinals. I think injuries kind of derailed him, but he broke out and he was an elite level player through the rest of his college career. But that's just an illustration of we see it so often.
Yeah. Who's another guy you'd like to talk about, Jeff? You got another one on the list here, right?
I do have another one on the list, and same team, Denver Broncos, same preaching some patience. A player that very, very frustrated with his rookie year 2 years ago, but then started to put it together the second half of last year. That's Marvin Mims. He's keep trade cut wide receiver 56. And you look at that Bo Nix offense, they really seemed to figure things out that second half of the year. He had some big explosive games. Flashback, I think it was the week 17 game against the Bengals when he was we're doing a show that we could look things up on the computer, but I know that he had a big game in that Bengals game. And so that's one that has shown the impact. Flashback to that Bills playoff game, scored the first touchdown in that game, got deep. And actually that might've been Troy Franklin. I don't know. I'm very, very tired at this point, and I'm thankful for all of our listeners that are here, but Marvin Mims is a guy that should be on your radar. He probably is on your radar already, but I'm not sure if he's high enough on your radar.
Yeah, it was the overtime loss against Kansas or against Cincinnati. That was kind of his breakout game, 103 yards and a couple of touchdowns. But it was so much more than that. It was really just the second half of the season, and Marvin Mims was one of those guys. Like, I was talking about Jordan Whittington earlier, and I'm talking about, the per route run data and those things that are really exciting and why you hope that comes together. Marvin Mims was another guy. If you look at what he did his rookie season, he had eye popping per route run efficiency, just didn't really get to play a full time role. But we saw that last year. It was around week 11 that they upped his snap count and he became I don't want to say a focal point of the offense, but became much more important to the offense. And from weeks 11 through weeks 18, which is, almost half the season, the second half of the season, he was putting up some great numbers, averaging 4.7 targets per game, which isn't eye popping, but because of the targets that he draws and how deep downfield they are, he averages over 15 yards per reception, and he was giving us pretty solid production here, 62 yards per game, scoring almost a touchdown per game. And that's kind of what you hope with a guy like Marvin Mims and a guy like Jordan Whittington, a guy who has shown us on a small sample that they can be very productive. And then if that sample size grows, then they can be a very productive fantasy asset. So completely with you on Marvin Mims. All right, the last guy I'm going to talk about, I really don't feel good talking about because he's a player that I've never really been too in on. I thought that the San Francisco 49ers made a huge mistake when they traded up to get Trey Lance third overall in that 2020 draft. And now we've kind of seen, San Francisco 49ers gave up on him. Dallas Cowboys gave up on him. But he's at the point now where he is available on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. Looking right now in Keep Trade Cut, they've got him as the QB 54. He's behind guys like Drew Lock and Hendon Hooker and Gardner Minshew and guys that you probably don't have any interest in. So I'm going to say go up there and pick up Trey Lance if you can get him for free. Hold him for the next month or so and see what happens. It's probably not going to work out, but the QB market is so dry right now. Somebody might give him a chance. I mean, we saw this with Sam Darnold, a guy who, really face planted on his rookie contract in the Jets and then, bounced around the league and was given an opportunity and bounced back at age 27. Trey Lance is still very, very young, still just 24 years old. And you look at the Giants, you look at the Steelers, you look at the Browns, you look at the Raiders. There are some teams out there that need to start looking at addressing the quarterback position. And outside of Aaron Rodgers, there aren't really any other veterans available. We've talked many times about how shallow this quarterback class is. So I don't want to be the Trey Lance guy. And this isn't me saying Trey Lance is going to break out and be a great football player, but all of the things that you loved about Trey Lance 5 years ago, the size, the speed, the youth, all of those things, they're still there, except now rather than paying with a top 3 rookie pick and you're in the first round of your draft, you can pick him up off the waiver wire for free, hold on to him through the draft and see what happens. Jeff, am I crazy for recommending Trey Lance on a dynasty show?
Well, I think you'd be crazy for recommending Trey Lance on anything but a dynasty show. So
Fair.
that's kind of where we land. But no, when you're looking at him as having that skill set that can translate into fantasy points, I think there's major concerns in terms of him actually being able to play the position. And
I want to say I have those concerns as well. I just want to say that I'm not sitting here saying
do.
Trey Lance is a good football player.
I know you
putting
do.
that out there.
But in deep enough leagues, he's probably on the waiver wire in many, many leagues. And again, you talk about a dry market, and if he lands in Minnesota has one quarterback on their roster right now. Maybe he lands there and goes to the Kevin O'Connell school of learning how to play quarterback. And then all of a sudden you've got something there. It's just that, but look for these players that either hold high pedigree previously, have skill sets that translate well to fantasy football, that are in positions that can ascend to tops of depth charts. That's really what you want to look for when you're digging deep on some of these players.
Yeah, and Zach Wilson, I'll throw his name out there too. Same draft class, another guy who really face planted, but he's got an opportunity now. We know Tua Tagovailoa, not the healthiest guy in the league. He misses a handful of games almost every single year. And Zach Wilson, it might not be pretty, but if he gets to play in that Mike McDaniel offense, just checking the ball down to Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, again, might not be pretty, but you could probably get Zach Wilson for free in your dynasty leagues right now. And if you're getting a handful of spot starts, it could be worth it. So yeah, I think when you're looking for these guys to pick up for free, pedigree, youth, and second chances are things that I'm allured by.
Shedeur Sanders is going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, isn't he?
I think he's going to be a New York Giant, but Steelers make a lot of sense. It seems like everybody's starting to move Shedeur into that top 3 now. I've seen, all of the mock drafts that are coming out. Not the mock drafts from anybody. I'm talking about the Daniel Jeremiahs and the Lance Zierleins, the guys who actually know. They're putting him inside the top 3 now. I've seen some have him going to Cleveland, some have him going to the Giants, but I think at this point I'd be pretty shocked to see Sanders fall out of the round 3 or pick 3.
Jalen Milroe going to be Steeler then?
That I can get behind, and that would be a ton of fun. I mean, not all that different from, what they tried to do last year with Justin Fields, a guy who can run, and we saw that offense worked well. I think that could be a lot of fun. Jalen Milroe. Let me because
under the
why
radar.
not? Let's just have the conversation here. Let's just say Jalen Milroe goes round 1 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is he like a top 5 pick in rookie drafts? I'd assume so, right?
I mean, he's certainly in that conversation. If he goes first round to the Pittsburgh Steelers with now DK Metcalf there and George Pickens,
Came into my head. I think he'd be like 6 or 7.
I mean, super flex. Yeah, he's certainly within the top 7, 8, and I think. But that we have to talk about young players because it is dynasty and it is rookie season. So that's the only reason.
So come for the veterans to stash and stay for the Travis Hunters, Shedeur Sanders, and Jalen Milroe talk. Want to thank everybody for tuning into another episode of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Jeff, this has been a blast, having so much fun doing this show with you. We've still got about a month left until the NFL draft, and we'll be continuing to bring you 2 shows a week. So be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.